What's going on? YouTube, listen up, young elder gang. This is Jabari Ray at you with another banger. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video, fam. I hope this video get at least 100,000 likes in this video. You will find history definitions, scripture information, and best of all, what we Americans have been deprived of from the beginning, the truth. Keep in mind this content used in this video is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. We will give you the total truth as we best understand it today. Be sure to hit that like button. Young Elder Gang, hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel, hit that bell, and don't forget to check back with us every day for new content. The greatest story never told, the bomb. Today, there are thousands of young so-called black men and women who are members of the Nation of Gods and Earth, or NGE. There are even thousands more who are not members, but whose lives have been affected in some positive way, from learning the knowledge of themselves at an early age. Why isn't the man who is responsible for awakening so many so-called black youth known to the masses of your people? Why has this man never been honored? Perhaps it's because his full greatness won't be realized until the world beholds the greatness of the masses of so-called black youth whose lives he touched. Let's take the time now to look back at the life of the man who deemed himself Allah in the flesh, the man history has yet to remember. The world elite bankers wanted Clarence 13x gone because his teachings and the resulting 5% nation movement was perceived as a fundamental challenge to the established economic and social power structures from which these bankers benefit. Clarence 13x's philosophy, and that of the Nation of Islam, from which he originated, centered on the idea that black men were divine and sovereign individuals, gods. This belief inherently challenges the narrative of a dominant white power structure that controls the majority of wealth and political influence, which was seen as a direct ideological threat to the elite's perceived right to rule and accumulate wealth. The 5% nation, like the Nation of Islam, encouraged black self-sufficiency and communal economic systems. This push for independence from the mainstream financial system, which was perceived as a threat to a system that relies on broad participation, debt, and the consistent flow of capital to established financial institutions. His teachings challenged established norms and authority structures, which could lead to social and political unrest that disrupt the stable environment preferred by financial elites for conducting business and maintaining control. The movement gained attention from media and law enforcement, with the FBI, COINTELPRO expressing concerns about its potential to form ties with more dangerous groups. From the bankers' perspective, a growing movement that challenges the core principles of their system and encourages a new, more rational, egalitarian one, was seen as a risk to the existing economic order. The elite often benefit from a stable social order. Any movement perceived as a hate group or a source of social friction, even if based on sensationalized rumors, was seen by those in power as a destabilizing force that needs to be neutralized to protect their interests. In essence, his ideas represented an alternative worldview that was fundamentally at odds with the values and systems that benefit the world elite bankers, making him a target in a dark, cold world where the elite seek to eliminate threats to their power and wealth. Clarence Edward Smith was born on February 22, 1928, and raised in Danville, Virginia, with his 5 brothers and 1 sister. During his childhood, Virginia was racially segregated, and he witnessed incidents of racism, including a fight between his father and a white man that was sparked by racial tensions. In 1946, he moved with his mother to New York City, where they settled in Harlem. He attended only 2 years of high school. In 1949, Smith fathered a child, Clarence Jowers, with William Jowers. He married a woman named Dora Smith in 1950. He fathered another child, Otis Jowers, with William in 1951. He also had several sons and daughters with Dora. Smith joined the U.S. Army in the early 1950s and was stationed in Korea from 1952 to 1954, where he served as an infantryman in the Korean War. After returning to the U.S., he lived in Harlem and served in the United States Army Reserve until 1960. During his military service, he became skilled in karate. Dora Smith embraced the Nation of Islam, NOI, while her husband was away, and he converted after returning to New York. By 1961, he had registered at Mosque No. 7 and changed his name to Clarence 13x in accordance with NOI practice. Before his conversion, he often smoked marijuana and gambled, activities forbidden by the NOI. After joining the group, he studied the NOI's doctrines and quickly progressed within their organizational structure, possibly thanks to skills learned in the military. His responsibilities included teaching martial arts and serving on the Fruit of Islam security team. He was recognized as a skilled speaker and reached the rank of student minister at Mosque No. 7. By 1963, he had come to the attention of the FBI. Informants recorded his presence at rallies led by Malcolm X. The early 1960s were a turbulent period for the NOI. Unrest was caused by conflicts between leaders Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X. Around that time, Clarence 13x became disenchanted with the organization, although the root of his qualms is not known. NOI members have offered contradictory accounts of the events that caused his exit and whether he left voluntarily. His departure has been variously attributed to doubts about the NOI's theology, violations of their moral code, objections to the luxurious lifestyles of their senior leadership, or Malcolm X's distrust of him. Dora Smith elected to stay with the group, prompting the couple's separation. Before leaving the NOI, Clarence 13x had begun to doubt their teaching that Wallace Fard Muhammad was a divine messenger. He believed that the NOI's teachings were contradictory because they taught that God is black, but encouraged reverence of Fard Muhammad, who was not of exclusively African descent. Clarence 13x concluded that divinity was found in all black men rather than in a single person. Several times before he left the NOI, he was censured by the leadership for these assertions. His friend John 37x elected to leave with him. Malcolm X left the NOI in 1963 and remained on good terms with Clarence 13x. Clarence 13x did not join Malcolm X's newly created group Muslim Mosque Inc. The U.S. government wanted Clarence 13x gone, meaning neutralized or removed as an influential figure, for reasons relating to his anti-establishment rhetoric, his movement's perceived threat to public order, and the general climate of surveillance of black activist groups in the 1960s. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover described Clarence 13x as a Harlem rowdy and a potential threat to President Lyndon B. Johnson, leading to the Secret Service developing a detailed file on him. Media and law enforcement often portrayed the 5% Nation as a violent hate group or street gang. Reports circulated, for instance, that he threatened to harm white children if his group did not receive government funding, which, though possibly exaggerated by the press and FBI, fueled official concern. Clarence 13x's teachings were a break from mainstream Islam and the Nation of Islam, promoting the idea that the black man was God personified and that the 85% of the world's population were ignorant. Such a message was seen as potentially radicalizing and a challenge to the existing social and racial hierarchy. The FBI worried that Clarence 13x would form ties with other, potentially more dangerous radical groups. The government kept close tabs on black power movements and leaders during this era, via programs like COINTELPRO, viewing any charismatic leader who could mobilize a large number of black people in Harlem as a potential threat to social stability. His movement operated outside traditional religious and secular structures, which made it difficult for authorities to predict or control its actions. He initially taught followers to hate white people, a position that would have made him a target of law enforcement monitoring despite later shifts towards cooperation with city leaders to prevent violence in Harlem. The fact that his 1969 murder remains unsolved has led some 5%ers to speculate that the federal government was involved, further highlighting the deep suspicion and conflict that existed between his movement and government authorities. Why was Clarence 13x a potential threat to President Lyndon B. Johnson? The characterization of Clarence 13x as a potential threat to President Lyndon B. Johnson stemmed from FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover's assessment in 1967, which led to a detailed folder being sent to the United States Secret Service. The perceived threat, though based largely on sensationalized rumors and law enforcement fears of his group's potential for violence and connections to other dangerous organizations, involved the following aspects. Law enforcement fears of a violent group. Local press and law enforcement often described Clarence 13x's 5%ers group as a violent hate group or a street gang. These reports, whether accurate or not, fueled official concern that the group might pose a physical danger. Rumored threats and instigation spread by the FBI. A specific unverified newspaper report in the New York Amsterdam News claimed that Clarence 13x had threatened to kill white children if his group did not receive a government subsidy. Such reports, even if unsubstantiated, could have been interpreted as an intent to cause harm or create civil unrest that could escalate to include the president. Perceived connections to other groups. Hoover feared that Clarence 13x would form ties with more established or violent groups, potentially increasing his capacity to carry out a threat. In the climate of racial tension and social unrest of the 1960s, any perceived link between fringe groups and potential violence was taken seriously by intelligence agencies. General surveillance and enemies list culture. The FBI was actively monitoring numerous individuals and groups during this period, particularly those involved in anti-war protests or racial activism, and President Johnson was known to have an enemies list of those he felt were working against him or the government. This atmosphere of intense government surveillance meant that individuals like Clarence 13x, who were seen as a local disturbance or potential radical leader, were naturally flagged as potential security risks to high-profile officials. Ultimately, while there is no public evidence that Clarence 13x made a concrete, direct threat to the president, the fears were part of a broader federal surveillance effort driven by sensationalized media coverage, generalized anxieties about domestic radical groups, and J. Edgar Hoover's specific concerns. The Nation of Islam, NOI, would have wanted Clarence 13x gone due to fundamental theological disagreements, his violations of the NOI's moral code, and his defiance of the leadership structure by teaching restricted doctrines to non-members. Clarence 13x began to doubt and eventually rejected the NOI's central teaching that Wallace Fard Muhammad was the one divine messenger of Allah. He found this confusing, in part because Fard Muhammad was not of exclusively African descent, even though the NOI taught that God is black. Instead, Clarence 13x concluded that divinity was found in all black men, teaching them they were individual gods. This was considered heretical by NOI leadership. Clarence 13x enjoyed gambling, a behavior explicitly condemned by the NOI's strict moral code. There are also accounts that he disagreed with the NOI's ban on drugs and alcohol. As a student minister and security officer, part of the Fruit of Islam, Clarence 13x had access to the NOI's secret Supreme Wisdom lessons. He began openly teaching these lessons, along with his own self-styled interpretations, Supreme Mathematics and Supreme Alphabet, to young people on the streets of Harlem, which was in direct violation of the NOI's practice of only revealing these to committed high-ranking members. He was censured multiple times by NOI leadership for these assertions and his refusal to stop. By claiming that all black men were divine and referring to himself as Allah the Father, Clarence 13x effectively placed himself in a higher position than Elijah Muhammad, who was considered the messenger of Allah. This created a direct challenge to Elijah Muhammad's authority and the NOI's hierarchical structure. The period was one of internal turmoil for the NOI, marked by conflicts between Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X. Clarence 13x was aligned with some of Malcolm X's views and remained on good terms with him after Malcolm X also left the NOI, which likely increased distrust from the main NOI leadership. These disagreements and acts of defiance led to Clarence 13x's excommunication or voluntary departure from the NOI in 1963, after which he founded the 5% Nation. After leaving the NOI, Clarence 13x and John 37x continued to study the group's teachings, sometimes while smoking marijuana. They assumed new names. 13x took Allah and 37x Abu Shahid. After reading an NOI book with 34 riddles known as the Lost Found Lessons, 37x concluded that numbers represented specific concepts, such as knowledge or wisdom. He referred to this system as living mathematics. During its development, he was imprisoned on firearms charges. While 37x was in prison, 13x taught a system of beliefs he referred to as supreme wisdom, which he saw as the core of Islam, to groups of young men. He was assisted by his friend James Howard, with whom he developed a modified version of living mathematics, supreme mathematics, and an accompanying doctrine about letters, the supreme alphabet. The development of these systems, considered a divine science by adherents, may have been influenced by the teachings of Sufism. Like some schools of Sufism, they found esoteric meanings in the alphabet. David Smydra of the Boston Globe compares these teachings to Kabbalah. Felicia Miyakawa of Middle Tennessee State University sees similarities to Gnosticism and Kemetism. Clarence 13x ascribed novel teachings, assigning backronyms to familiar words. He stated that the letters of the word Allah stood for arm, leg, arm, head, signifying the human body. This was said to prove that humanity held a divine nature. He named parts of the New York area after locations in the Middle East that are significant to Islam. Harlem was referred to as Mecca and Brooklyn as Medina. Other disaffected NOI members, including some who served the fruit of Islam, were soon drawn to his burgeoning group. Several people from the NOI who were unwilling to choose between loyalty to Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X also joined. Clarence 13x incorporated aspects of the theology taught by the feuding leaders. In the group's early years, some 5%ers attended NOI events. Clarence 13x's theology had much in common with the teachings of the NOI, although there were notable differences. He taught his followers that he was an incarnation of God, and they each were gods. His followers were thus encouraged to look within themselves in their search for God. Clarence 13x taught that there was an inherent greatness in those of African descent not found in Europeans and their descendants, echoing statements made by Elijah Muhammad. Clarence did not enforce the NOI's strict moral rules. One way that the group appealed to potential converts was by allowing many practices condemned by the NOI, including gambling, alcohol consumption, and drug use. Clarence 13x told his followers to avoid developing addictions, but that drug use was not inherently wrong. He strictly forbade the consumption of pork, arguing that pigs were similar to animals that are not eaten in the United States, such as rats and dogs, and hence should not be consumed. Owing to their belief that black men are gods, the group allowed its members to make choices about clothing and most aspects of diet. Early members of the group often proselytized on street corners for hours. Clarence 13x's assistants led classes about the group's teachings, strictly enforcing study habits. He instructed his followers to memorize his teachings about the significance of numbers and letters. Once they did so, they were said to gain an understanding of profound truths. These lessons were taught in a form that resembled catechisms. Rather than hold services in mosques, they gathered for monthly meetings known as parliaments, which were often held outdoors. Attendees were given wide freedom to speak in a system that Ted Swedenborg of the University of Arkansas has compared to Quaker meetings. Clarence 13x's group was initially known as the Sons of Almighty God Allah, or the Blood Brothers. After Malcolm X's death, the group became known as the 5%ers, or the 5% Nation. The name was drawn from the NOI's claim to be the 5% of the black community who knew and promoted the truth about God. Clarence 13x considered his movement to be the 5% of the NOI that still held to truth and integrity. The other 95% were said to be unaware of the truth or corrupt. Clarence 13x assembled an inner circle of assistants, 9 of whom are referred to by 5%ers as the firstborn. They are said to embody his attributes. The assistants were assigned to spread the group's teachings to younger people, many of whom took African names, including some from non-Islamic societies. Clarence 13x taught Afrocentrism to his disciples and often wore a dashiki. Male 5%ers members frequently wore tasseled kufis, and female members wore colorful African head wraps. Some 5%ers supported themselves via drug dealing and petty theft. Others intentionally committed minor legal infractions, hoping to proselytize to others who had been arrested. Clarence 13x's followers saw him as a divine messenger and referred to him as Father Allah. This elevated him to a higher position than Elijah Muhammad, who had deemed himself the messenger of Allah. Eventually, Clarence 13x stopped identifying himself as a Muslim and spoke out against the reverence of Fard Muhammad, casting him as a mystery god. He rejected the idea that God is invisible, which he felt weakened people. He encouraged his followers to learn about and respect other spiritual traditions. Female converts were initially referred to as nurses. Clarence 13x renamed them Earths in 1967. He taught that women were not gods, as he believed that they were created by man and did not possess creative power. In his view, women could nurture, but only men could make children. Women were said to resemble the earth in their ability to sustain life. Clarence 13x had a patriarchal philosophy, and the 5%ers were initially overwhelmingly male. He spoke in favor of fathers arranging their daughters' marriages and told women to embody submission by serving their husbands as God. Polygamy or serial monogamy was allowed, and legal marriage was discouraged. Clarence 13x encouraged his followers to have many children and discouraged the use of birth control. NOI leaders were angry that Clarence 13x freely taught portions of their doctrine that they only revealed to committed members. Although one of their captains repeatedly asked him to stop, Clarence refused. Clarence 13x also experienced conflict within his family. His children did not revere him, and hostility quickly developed between core 5%ers and some of his sons when Willeen Jowers brought them to visit him. On December 9, 1964, Clarence 13x was shot twice in the torso while at a popular gathering place in the basement of a Harlem tenement. He was brought to Harlem Hospital, where he was treated and released. He later claimed that he died and returned to his body a short time later. In a 2007 study of the 5% movement, American journalist Michael Muhammad Knight speculates that this caused his followers to see him as a Christ figure. The identity and motivation of the shooter are unknown. Knight notes that law enforcement and rival Muslim groups both had a motive to attack Clarence 13x. Some 5%ers have speculated that the attack was part of a robbery attempt or retaliation for unpaid gambling debts. Clarence 13x's companions reported that he instructed them not to seek revenge on the shooter and to forswear violence. While recuperating from his wounds, Clarence 13x sought to distinguish his movement from other Islamic movements, abandoning Arabic greetings for English expressions. The 5%ers soon attracted attention from media and law enforcement. Local papers published negative coverage of the group, describing them as a violent hate group or a street gang. The New York Amsterdam News reported that Clarence 13x had threatened to kill white children if his group did not receive a government subsidy. In 1965, the FBI initiated an investigation of his group and may have provided sensationalized rumors to the press. That year, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover described Clarence 13x as a Harlem rowdy and feared that he would form ties with more dangerous groups. The FBI developed a detailed file on Clarence 13x. In 1967, Hoover described him as a potential threat to President Lyndon B. Johnson and sent a detailed folder about him to the United States Secret Service. After Malcolm X's death in 1965, Clarence 13x mourned his loss but did not attend his funeral because it was rumored that they were going to kill him at Malcolm X's funeral. In May 1965, while visiting the site of Mosque No. 7, then closed, 13x and several of his companions were told to leave by a police officer. They left and began to vandalize nearby buildings and blocked the street near the former headquarters of Muslim Mosque Inc. More police arrived and subdued 13x after an altercation, bringing him into custody with several of his followers. After being arrested, he refused to identify himself and was charged with assault and drug possession. About 60 of his followers attended his arraignment but were removed from the court after shouting "Peace." 13x proclaimed his innocence and announced his intent to defend himself in court. He told the judge that he was Allah and that the city would face grave judgment if he were not released. The judge disregarded his prognostication and set his bail at $9,500. At a court date in June, about 55%ers protested outside the court. Afterwards, several were arrested on charges of making Molotov cocktails. In July, the court sent 13X to Bellevue Hospital Center for a psychiatric examination. While in the hospital, he made a few disciples and communicated with some followers through a hospital window. Under his instructions, 5%ers resisted future NOI leader Louis Farrakhan's attempts to convert them. Knight states that 13X's psychiatric results were not processed for an unusually long time. He posits that the delay was due to FBI involvement and argues that 13X was a political prisoner. In November 1965, 13X was ruled incompetent to stand trial and committed to the New York State Department of Mental Hygiene, which placed him at the Matewan State Hospital for the criminally insane. After he declared himself Allah and a master gambler, the doctors concluded that he had schizophrenic reaction, paranoid type with delusions of grandeur. He faced indefinite commitment. Many 5%ers and their converts traveled to the hospital to meet with him and receive instruction. He proselytized to fellow inmates, converting one young white man, who later became a committed follower. While 13X was in prison, the 5%ers continued to proselytize and teach their doctrines. He instructed his followers to adopt names different from those used in the NOI, to differentiate their group. After attaining a certain degree of knowledge of the group's doctrines, members were allowed to adopt the surname Allah, and sometimes God, as a first name. This was in recognition of 13X's teachings that black men were gods, and that each member should worship himself. His followers often took the name Allah but refrained from referring to themselves as such in Clarence's presence, in deference to his authority. After a 1966 decision, Pate v. Robinson by the Supreme Court of the United States, limits were placed on the confinement of mentally ill criminals, causing many to be released. 13X was consequently released in March 1967. In mid-1967, New York City Mayor John Lindsay sought to develop closer ties with leaders of impoverished neighborhoods. Prompted in part by concerns voiced by the New York Police Department, NYPD, the mayor dispatched one of his aides, Barry Goddard, to meet with Clarence 13X. Belying his fearsome reputation, Clarence 13X had a congenial meeting with Goddard, during which he requested more bus routes and school funding. Clarence 13X subsequently attended a meeting of black leaders at Gracie Mansion, the mayor's official residence. The city provided buses for 5%ers to travel to a Long Island park, and with help from the National Urban League, obtained an abandoned storefront for use as a school. It became known as the Allah School in Mecca and aimed to prepare young people for college preparatory schools. Tensions soon formed between the 5%ers and the school's administrators. Clarence 13X desired more control over the curriculum and had difficulty finding qualified teachers. Police regularly visited the school to ensure that the students were not being radicalized. In 1975, Goddard chronicled his friendship with Clarence 13X in The Mayor's Man. The book was well received by some 5%ers who republished portions of it after it went out of print. They have not reprinted the entire book, owing to a passage in which Goddard relates that Clarence 13X offered to allow him to sleep with his teenage daughter. In February 1968, Lindsay estimated that there were about 500 to 700 5%ers. Some of Clarence 13X's followers attempted to create breakaway groups, proclaiming themselves prophets and starting their own movements. They generally retained aspects of 5%er doctrine with different emphases. After the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in April 1968, Lindsay feared that rioting would occur in Harlem. He traveled to the neighborhood to express condolences. Clarence 13X and his followers were among those who accompanied him as he walked the streets. Clarence 13X instructed his followers to try to prevent violence and looting. He was commended by the city's leadership for his efforts, and they subsequently agreed to help him publish a book of 5%er teachings and portions of the Quran. William Jowers recalled that Clarence 13X admitted that his previous teachings about racial hatred were wrong around this time. He later described himself as neither anti-white nor pro-black, and saw some of his white contacts with the city as allies in the advancement of his teachings. His white convert was released from state custody and joined his teacher in Harlem during the February 1969 nor'easter. He was accepted as a 5%er, as Clarence 13x maintained that civilization, rather than race, was valued by the group. Clarence 13x made possibly contradictory statements about whether white individuals could be reformed. Contrary to his radical reputation, Clarence endorsed some conservative positions in the late 1960s, including capital punishment, respect for the U.S. flag, and American involvement in Vietnam. He allowed his supporters to attend Christmas celebrations. Knight notes that these shifts may have been intended to decrease suspicions of law enforcement. Clarence 13x was then allowed to visit a juvenile detention center to speak to young 5%ers and won some concessions from the institution's leadership. Some secular black leaders disliked him, owing to his supportive comments about the mayor and neglect of revolutionary rhetoric. On one occasion, he was invited to address an audience of black Marxists, then spoke to them about numerology. Around 1968, Clarence 13x fathered a son with a young convert named Gusavia. That year, Gloria Steinem published an article about Clarence 13x in New York Magazine. She blamed the NOI for the previous attempt to kill Clarence, arguing that they were angered by his claim to be Allah and thus above Elijah Muhammad. Clarence 13x also received coverage from international media, including a Canadian television program. By 1969, Clarence 13x was Chief Sleeping Little. He feared that he would be killed and instructed his followers to remain strong if he died. On June 12th, he spent time with several of his disciples at their school. He left the school between 2 and 3 a.m. on June 13th and then gambled for an hour or two. As was his occasional practice, he traveled to Dora Smith's house to rest. He was ambushed by 3 assailants who fatally shot him while he was in the lobby of her apartment building at 21 West 112th Street in Harlem, within the Martin Luther King Jr. Towers housing project. That morning, several people from the mayor's office met with his family. The mayor later visited the 5%ers school to express condolences. Clarence 13x's funeral was held 4 days after his death. It was attended by about 400 people and was followed by a procession through Harlem. His death put the leadership of his movement in question. There was no clear successor. At that time, his followers were primarily teenagers, and several of his top leaders subsequently struggled with drug addiction. Most local media sources gave Clarence 13x positive coverage in the wake of his death. The Daily News connected his murder with the recent death of NOI activist Charles Kenyatta, casting them as part of a Muslim war. The mayor believed that the NYPD told them this and was angered by their claim. Louis Farrakhan denied culpability, maintaining that he had good relations with Clarence 13x. NYPD investigators suspected that he was killed by members of an extortion ring, possibly connected to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. In August 1969, an arrest was made in connection with his murder. The suspect denied involvement and charges were soon dropped. 5%ers have posited different culprits, including the CIA, the NOI, or a disgruntled follower. 5%er membership plunged after Clarence 13x's death but rebounded in 1970 after new leadership emerged and revitalized the group. After his death, the group was not dominated by a single leader. This may have been a result of their teaching that all black men are gods, which rendered authoritarian leadership untenable. Knight doubts that Clarence 13x set out to build a movement or a culture, but after his death, the movement expanded and gained converts across the United States. 5%ers have celebrated Clarence 13x's birthday as a holiday and minimized the descriptions of his flaws in their accounts of his life. Numerous apocryphal stories from his life have circulated among the group. Some accounts claim that he gambled, only as a means to reach others with his teachings. He did not leave behind a record of his teachings, and the group had few formalized tenets at the time of his death. In the following decades, the group's doctrine became more complicated. Akbar Muhammad of the NOI described Clarence 13x as confused. Relations between the 5%ers and NOI leaders have improved over time. Clarence 13x's teachings may have influenced the doctrines of Dwight York, founder of the Nuwaubian Nation. York saw Clarence 13x's teachings as an insufficient, incomplete path. Lawyer Sidney Davidoff, one of Lindsay's assistants, deemed Clarence 13x a little bit snake oil salesman and a little bit crazy, but no more unstable than anyone else preaching a gospel on the street corner. Davidoff saw Clarence 13x's black supremacist teachings as a way to instill confidence in young people. Knight states that Clarence 13x went from a Harlem rowdy to legitimate community leader. M. Lindsay later cast Clarence 13x's role in the city as similar to that of Al Sharpton.